We go into this information about adverse childhood experience, building strong brain Tennessee. But as you say, as many of you know it, what we want to happen through this movement that's already happening is that you go out and continue to spread the good news. And the good news is that there is some help for those. There is a possibility of mitigating adverse childhood experience if we change the mindset of people in our community, such as Dr. Stewart said. Next week, we're going to be back in Nashville. Legislation was signed last year because we made the noise that every school in the state of Tennessee is going to be trauma-informed and trauma responsive. Every teacher across the state is being trained. We want to thank Governor Bill Lee for signing that legislation, but Senator Katrina Robinson for actually moving that needle ahead. So give them a hand for taking that first step. And we're gonna push that they're adding to that additional wraparound services. It's one thing to be able to assess a child, it's another to be able to provide the help for those. So what is this Building Strong Brains Tennessee? It is to work to change the culture of Tennessee so that the state overarching philosophy, policy, programs, and practices for children, youth, and young adults utilize the latest brain science to prevent and mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experience. Again, one of the things is that just like cigarettes was such a thing in so many households, really back in the day, you could sit in here and smoke a cigarette, right? Then a campaign began to say that it is unhealthy to smoke in an environment like this. So now you can't go in restaurants or anywhere. This is the same mindset we're pushing to change. And one of those leading organizations who's helping to push to change that is helping us today in the sponsoring this event and collecting the data across the state of Tennessee. And again, was one of those individuals I was in the woods with for 5 days, Brother Roy Ray with the Rotary Family Youth Initiative. Give Brother Roy Ray a hand. Ray stayed in that room with me for 5 days, and he read my book in 5 days, and he said, Charlie, this matchup, we got to work together. Came out and put me and Dr. Stewart on the board of Rotary, and we have seen this thing move, and now he's helping across the state of Tennessee, going into rural communities, suburban communities, teaching and training to change the culture across the state of Tennessee. So when we look at it, what are the pillars and the foundation of these actions that need to take place? One of these things that we started to see is that when you start at the beginning, Dr. Stewart just talked about the prevented change in the language of juvenile court, for example. It was Dr. Stewart influence over Merrill Lee Harris that the new detention center that is being built is not being called juvenile court. It is being called, I forgot what it is, youth something. That's all that matters. Start with the youth. But because it is important that we build these young people early, give them the intervention early, and I'll talk more about even my impact with juvenile court early on in life. But education, when we start, and I'm going to talk about the brain science, 0 to 3, we know 80% of the brain is developed early. So as we put resources into schools and education, we would change the outcome of what we see right here in the state of Tennessee. Right here today in the state of Tennessee, 30,000 prisoners are locked up in jail in the state of Tennessee. For those 30,000 prisoners, we spend $700 million a year to keep them locked up. For the same number of 30,000 children right now being educated in our school, they only spending $200 million. Y'all better hear me. We got to change that. And if they spent 300 to 400, we might not be spending 700 million later when they don't follow the cycle. And so it impacts the economic. One of the big things, and again, Governor Bill Haslam, who championed this original movement of ACEs in our state by putting $2.5 million in the budget recurring, was that he's seen the economic impact. The Sycamore Institute did a research study that showed that we were losing $5.2 billion a year economically to people who have been impacted by ACEs in our state. So he said we got to do something to change this language in this game. Then we talk about responsible citizenship. We already know if you can't get a good job, if you're not educated, then you can't be a responsible citizen. You can't be a taxpaying citizen. You're not being able to carry your load. But this one right here hit me, and I wanted to stay here for this reason. After I did the ACE assessment, and I learned that those who had 4 or more traumatic experience was 1,200 times more likely to attempt suicide. Those who had 6 or more were at risk of living 25 years less than those who had 0. And I was wondering as a pastor why I was burying 14-year-olds and 25-year-olds. I got tired of doing funerals after funerals of people that I knew that was my same age. And so myself, coming out of the Dixon Home Projects in North Memphis, seeing one of my best friends killed one year, the next year seeing another one of my friends killed, had a gun one day put to my head, the guy pulled the trigger, it didn't go off, but then when he turned around and ran and shot, it went off at me. So growing up angry, saying now, I'm living in a way that I can be dead before, most people are getting ready to really live life, said we got to do something different. So 4 things that you're going to get in part out of this training here is that, one, we're talking about building brain architect is established early in life and support lifelong learning, behavior, and health. Secondly, stable current relationships and serve and return interactions shape brain architect. Thirdly, toxic stress in early years of life can derail healthy development. And when we're talking about that toxic stress, y'all, and when we're talking about ACEs, I want you to look at it this way. Right now, if you all came into this school and I told you that it was some contamination in the water, that we might have lead, you're saying, well, I'm not drinking that water. Why? Because you know the impact that lead has on the neural development of the brain of an individual. But right now, you can test that water and determine what's in that water. But you cannot test unless you ask the question, what happened, what's in the toxic stress of a child or a person who is going through stress in life. And this is why it's a silent killer, but we have to be more intentional about how we address this, because many of us, we live in these communities, we live in these homes, we know what happened. We cannot just continue to allow it to happen and expect a different outcome. So then how do we begin to do that? As we talk about responding, we have to be focused on building resilience. And resilience can be built through serve and return relationship, improving self-regulation skills and executive function. Though there are sensitive periods of brain development in early childhood and adolescence, resilience can be strengthened at any age. I say this so often. Many people say you can't teach a old dog new tricks. You can if they're willing to learn. My people perish because of lack of knowledge. So when we talk about brain architects support lifelong learning, behavior, and health, as Dr. Stewart said, the young people's brain is not fully developed. But yet we are so eager to try to push them and prosecute them, hold them accountable when we know that they haven't gotten the tools that they need to be able to function the way that they need to function. So brains are built over time, starting in the early years of life. Simple skills come first. More complex skills build on top of them. Cognitive, emotional, and social capabilities are intertwined throughout the life course. A strong foundation in the early years improves the odds for positive outcome, and weak foundations increase the odds of later difficulties. And this is why we do celebrate Merle Lee Harris, Jim Strickland coming together to make early childhood a priority, that every child get access to that early development. Because watch this here, we're leaving it many times to homes that we are knowing that are dysfunctional and trying to say that this child is going to be all right, and you wonder why they start in 2 or 3 years behind, because the parents behind. I know this. We in the homes of parents, one of them, we just got a parent into the child in the school where her mama dropped out in the 9th grade. So the 2 months school have already started, and she's saying, okay, I'll get them there, but they still weren't in school. Right. That's right. So it wasn't important to her, so it's not important for her children. What do you see when you see this building? What do you see? Any of y'all, you can talk back at me. A frame, right? What happens before the frame? The foundation. And if we don't build on a solid foundation, we found ourselves continually have to tie this house down and rebuild it over. I remember I talked to our teachers all the time about this, because I got a call one day from one of our city councilmen. He said, Charlie, we have one of the developers that's building some homes out there on Mount Terrace, and he keep calling and say every time he rebuild that house, somebody go in there and rip all of it back out, the carpet out, and tie the house back down. What can we do? I said, let's get the community around it. When we got the community around it and they started supporting it and started seeing a support back and forth between each other, the houses didn't get broke back into. So when we're talking about our children are like houses. Our teachers and many of us, we are like architects in the lives of these children. And many times we put things into and build that child up, but when we send them back home to a community with no home ownership training, no house training, that's where they rip out everything we just built up in them. So this here just shows the neural developments in the brain. I just talked about that earlier, that 80% of the brain development is done in about the third year. So you see the activity around the second year. So you think about that child in many of these communities. Watch this here. I had to get away from saying, that old saying, why the parents ain't training these children. What happened to the parents? See, nobody ain't asking that question. And then when you start asking that question, you'll find out that parent wasn't parent. Y'all gonna make me preach. But I got to say this. So it's a sermon that in the book of Jeremiah, it talks about why the Lord said, he said, while you was in your mother's womb, I knew you. I had to ask him, why? How did you know him? He said, because I knew his father. Oh, y'all better hear me. See, many times we hear people say, you act just like your daddy, the doctor just said. So he already knew here how your daddy was acting. Oh, y'all better hear me. He didn't get to serve and return. Serve and return interaction build brains and skill. Young children naturally seek interaction through babbling for facial expression and gestures and adults and respond in kind. These serve and return interactions are essential for the development of healthy brain circuits. Therefore, systems that could support the quality of relations in early care setting. Watch this here. Communities in homes also support the development of sturdy brain. I say this, y'all, and many times we push, and I hear and I support our schools 100%, but we lose it when we try to say all the resources need to go to school, they're going to do all the work. 2/3 of the education for the child happened before they even get to school. It happened in a home and a community. So what do you think happening in the school, the dysfunction that's happening in the home and in the community? Now the teacher got to deal with all of that. With the little resources that I just said, they only get 200 million when prisoners are getting 700 million for the same issues. I just said something. Adolescent brain development period, vulnerabilities and opportunities. Again, this is why we should not give up on our teenagers. This is why I didn't give up on these young people here at this school and the young man I had up here today. Many people wanted to give up and they gave up on him. But watch this here. Those teenagers' brain, as teenagers or adolescents, are looking to absorb. They're looking for information. And I still don't want to preach, but I got a little preach in me. But it was a little boy by the age of 12. And he was walking from Jerusalem, went back with his parents. And his parents went on about the way. And here he was sitting back with the doctors and getting at 12 years old, looking for wisdom. And we are not there for our children when they're adolescent. They're looking for wisdom. And he gained favor with God and with man. Why? Because somebody pulled into him. I just preached. So when we talk about positive stress, we talk about what our children deal with, and a lot of us. We saying, I had to get up here and go to this training, something some of us, many have heard before, and many of them came out for CEUs just for some extra continuing education. We're going to make sure you get that certificate. But it's that stress that these children are dealing with that's good. Some of them tell you some of this stress is early on, is good for them. It builds that confidence in them. Many times, and this is a book, y'all, I want y'all to read this book. It's called, by Robert Lupton, called Toxic Charity. Y'all ever heard of that book? Toxic Charity, right? Teach a person how to fish, you eat for a day, drink some water. Toxic Charity. Charity, yeah. Robert Lupton. He's out of Atlanta, Georgia. But he says something in that book around the page 126. He said, if you give to them once, you create appreciation. You give twice, anticipation. You give 3 times, expectation. You give 4 times, entitlement. You give 5 times, dependency. And see, so many times we're giving to our children, here go my twin daughters right here, y'all. They blessed like highly favored. Then matter of fact, let me take a moment to pause to my wife back there and say hey to my wife back in the back, amen. If I don't say hey to her, I might not be able to sleep. I might have to sleep on the couch. But blessed by her to have 6 children of our own, all the way from 7 years old to these 22-year-olds. And I know that these babies here got plenty. And now I'm trying to break them. It's too late now, right? So then we talk about tolerable stress, that next level of stress. And this is that stress, that tragic, unavoidable events like a natural disaster or losing a loved one that's not good for us. But if supported caregivers are around to buffer the stress responses, these events won't do lasting damage to the brain. Let me say this to you. It's like this with our children. Our children, watch this here, that's been impacted by sexual molestation, by emotional distress, physical distress, these type of ACEs and trauma that, watch this here. I say it like this. Any of our veterans in this house, anybody been veterans? Again, thank y'all for y'all service. When you went to the service, Colonel, you all was trained to fight, right? What about a child from a baby that was hit, slapped, cussed out, told he'll never be nothing, molested, and now he's 13, 14 years old, and this all he got? He was trained. Because there come a time, three things happen when you're traumatized. You freeze, you fight, or you take flight. When I asked 90% of the children at juvenile court, and I know Dr. Stewart done this, I've done the training with many of the kids down at juvenile court, 90% of them said, Pastor, we fight. They tired of freezing. They're tired of taking flight. Now they chose to fight. And so we got to think about that when these children are. So what are you doing when you create a culture of mitigating trauma? You become that buffer in the life of that child. That child is like running towards a brick wall and they just say, I'm just going to hit this brick wall. But when they hear your voice saying you can make it, they jump over that wall. All they need is a buffer. I don't care if it's a mentor. For me, it was a mentor. All of the trauma that I saw, it was Director Tony Armstrong, who was a rookie cop in our community at the time, who made sure I got on the bus every time the Girls and Boys Club left to play a game to get me out of that community. Every time as I grew up, I could hear his voice saying, Chuck, you're going to be better than this. You're going to do more than this. That gave me the ability to jump. But it's this third one that I hear many times, Dr. Stewart, ever since you honored us at the University of Tennessee, Mark Norris, he said the judge, now Norris, he was our former senator, he pulled me to the side, he said, Charlie, I need to talk with you about getting this into the courts. He said, I had a young man who came to my courtroom and I just sentenced him because he went into a Pizza Hut. And he said when he walked out the Pizza Hut, a man walked out behind him, he pulled the gun out and blew the man's brains out. He asked him in his courtroom, why did you shoot the man? The boy said, I don't know. So we got to think about what's causing these individuals not to think before they act. That's that toxic stress. So let me just say real quick, ongoing repeated exposure to abuse or neglect is bad for the brain development. If no supportive adults are present to help buffer the stress response, stress hormones will damage development structures in the child brain. The result is an increased vulnerability to lifelong physical and mental health problems, including addiction. And it was sad to hear our director of school, the commissioner of education the other day. I heard her on a setting talk about how we are number 50 in the country. The state of Tennessee, director, you can help me on this, said we're 50 in the country when it comes to child mental health. Said we the last because we're not investing in children mental health. Why? Because they're not saying anything. We're not asking them the question, what happened? We just immediately saying what's wrong and punish them for what's wrong instead of addressing what happened. And when we don't, it builds up until now we're saying they're mentally ill and they got to see a therapist. These children don't need therapists. They need a hug, a love, and a community of support for them. So when we look at the children's brain, this is a CAT scan of an early child brain, and one on my right here is one that get that servant return. That all that red is the activity of them people playing and playing with that child, giving that child interaction. But the one on the left is a brain of a Romanian child in a war zone country. And many times you can look at these children in our own neighborhoods. When you look at the poverty and the dysfunction, they just looking at you with a blank stare because they don't know you're supposed to interact socially because nobody ever played with that child as a child, and now they're a big adult, still got that child wanting somebody to play with them, but we're saying something is wrong with them. So this right here is just one I just want you to look at. How many of y'all heard of epigenetics? I know the ones who went through this training talked about epigenetics was a study of a rat they did, and I said I was with Dr. Stewart. I did a training over at the University of Tennessee, and it kind of blew my mind that they were finna do a study on 2,000 rats for crack cocaine. I said, you don't have to do no study on rats. I can go in the neighborhood and get you some people that's a hood rat on crack that you can hear talk back to you about why they on crack. But anyway, $3.2 million to do a study on that. Okay. 20 years later, we still ain't found a cure for crack cocaine, but you want to study some more rats. But I ain't talking about the University of Tennessee now. They're my partners, y'all. But I got to move on. So we talk about air traffic control. Executive function is a group of skills that help us to focus on multiple streams of information at the same time, set goals and make plans, make decisions in light of available information, revise plans, and resist hasty action. Again, getting these children the ability to learn and structure. See, we look at the educational system now. Again, I thank God for all our educators. Where are all the educators in the house? Raise your hand. Give our educators a hand for being here. You all are awesome, awesome, awesome. I wish I had some awesome ones, but back in my day, I guess they thought something was wrong with me. But it was what happened to me. And I say that is because many times, you know, I go to school and I was thinking about me in the second grade and in the third grade that they just holler and say, why you don't have your number 2 principal? But they never asked me the fact that I was being molested as a child, what happened to me. So I'm just sitting there quiet. Shut down, shutting up, not saying nothing, and nobody never asked. Then I get to the 7th grade, and now I see my best friend shot in the head and killed. And then in the 8th grade, seeing another friend. Nobody never asked, where your number 2 pencil? That's all they said, because that's all they know. And that's what they say. I'm here to teach you reading, writing, and arithmetic. I ain't here to be your mama. Your community messed up, that's on you. Executive function is a key biological foundation of school readiness as well as outcomes and health and employability. Again, when we talk about health outcomes, when we talk about the ability that many people, when we talk about, Dr. Stewart talked about that earlier, that many of these young people can't get jobs. I'm not scared to say it. I've been a keynote speaker at the Opioid Summit with Monty Burks. They just called me back to be one at the Resilient Conference Summit next year. And I said this when I got on the stage. I said, I may be the only one. They get up on this stage right after the governor got up and said that may have ever smoked weed in my life. May have been the only one that bust a hole in the wall when my wife said something crazy to me. I said, but it's not what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me. Those things I just shared with you, that's what happened. So when you're a child, and I said this at the Resilience, at the opioid company, I said, they saying brain is messed up by the use of drugs. The brain is not messed up by the use of drugs. It's messed up when you're a child and you don't have no hope and you can't cope. That's when you got on dope. If we ain't addressing it as a child, then we got to deal with it and say it's the, oh, y'all hear me? So when we talk about when did this start, we said it started before you was in your mother's womb. It's the toxic stress of the dysfunction of that community. It's the historical trauma. It's all that person been going through, and now child choose to bear a child in this environment. And now you got these other things are added on to that once they come into this environment that we're not addressing and dealing with. When we come together as a community, again, all we saying is we just going by the evidence. They did the research, Center for Disease Control, 1995, 96, did the original research, so our government paid for it. State after state have given, again, I just said they gave $3.2 million for some rats. They still study rats. When we got the knowledge that we can go to our state legislators, our city council, and say, stop locking these children up and get some real help in these communities that we know that's been dysfunction after generation after generation. So when the original study was done in 1996 by the CDC and the Council for Epigenetics, this is some of the research that came out of 36.1% that was 0 ACEs, 26% with 1 ACE, and 15.9% with 2. But you see the number there that 22% had 3 or more traumatic experience. I'm going to say this to you. Don't take it that if a person only had 1 ACE, they all right. That one traumatic experience for somebody that didn't have resilience or executive function can cause them to take their life. So we can't sit there, good to see you, Principal, can't sit there and not understand that we can impact the life of these children that 1 ACE and thinking that we can't do nothing, let alone somebody that got 3 or more. So what are we talking about when we're talking about adverse childhood experience? When out of that original study, 10.6 of them had physical abuse, 28.3 had emotional abuse, 20% had sexual abuse. 14.8% had physical neglect, 9.9% had emotional neglect. Then you're talking about those other households dysfunction. Many times, and I'm so blessed to travel with Roy across the state of Tennessee. I don't care if we're in the rural, where we're in suburbs, the people are now talking about it. And I'm glad to have our good friend Marie and her husband here with us out of Germantown that's helping us push legislation that said that this is not just happening in the city. It's happening in Germantown and Cordova. Many times people are not talking about it because that's the way we can hide our stuff. But we got to stop hiding because our kids are taking their life, because our kids are ending up on drugs and killing themselves. And watch this here. As they take opioids away from them, then what do? They resort to street drugs and they're dying, trying to cope with all of this going on. Some of those other ACEs that's been talked about: poverty, racism, peer victimization, i.e. bullying, race, social conditioning, and historical trauma. So when we talk about the impact of those ACEs and the effect that it has, well, the more ACEs that you do have, the greater the outcomes of you being obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempt, STDs, heart disease, cancer, such as behavior, smoking, alcoholism, drugs, life potential, graduation rate, academic achievement loss. All of these things are impacting why a child chooses not to go to school, and we again are not asking the question, what happened? And so you see, as it go up, the higher the ACEs, the more the possibility to happen. And again, I said this started at conception. So when we begin to create a culture and an environment that begin to address and mitigate an adverse childhood experience, we begin to stop this pyramid that we're seeing so many of our children go down and end up at early death. That it started at the bottom with the adverse childhood experience, then that disrupted neurodevelopment of the brain, then the social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, then the adoption of behavior and health risks, diseases, disabilities, and social problems, then early death. So this here shows, and when we talk about research and evidence and what Dr. Stewart said, why we have to get this information and why they have to collect this information to share with the policymakers, this is why this has got to become a community thing, y'all. Because if we allow government to keep this cycle going, and they're not fixing this, because this study and research go back to the original, and that they still do research time after then. If we took 100 people in this room and said how many had 4 more ACEs, we're going to see these type of outcomes. 61% drinking caused problems with friends and family. 43% couldn't do usual activities to help disability. 52% intimate partner violence and victim. This is why I work intentionally with our police department, because I get that call. I got a call 2 days before Christmas, and this is what response looked like. The police said, Charlie, we don't want to arrest this family because it was about to get bad, but we hear and we see this. And they said what happened is these folks just moved into Fraser. They have no furniture. They have nothing for the Christmas. They arguing about the fact that this one not working, and then this one can't buy no food and nothing. So can we help this family? You know what I did? I called on y'all, and you responded. We was able to get refrigerator for this family. We was able to get every child Christmas toy. We took a Christmas tree in there that night, and the whole family oh my God, they called me every day. All they needed was that support, and they was trying. They said nobody would never help us, Pastor, but the thing is, they were not taught to ask for that help. Because many times they turned down because of what happened to the person they asked. I just said something. Hurt people hurt people. Traumatize people. And many times we going to hurt people trying to get help when they hurting themselves. Even when they got the help to give, they still hurt. And they want you to talk to them about what happened to them. And that's why we got to be intentional about asking people these questions, because these are the outcomes that we're seeing. And our police share this with me often. Over 12,000 families a year on domestic violence call. I don't care what community it is. It's across the board that they're getting these calls on domestic violence. Why? What effect it have? It had effect on your child when your child is seeing this. Now your child is going to school and bullying because they seen you whoop up on the other person. So what caused our governor, former governor and current governor, and many across the country to take this? I was excited to see when I was in Baltimore, our former district governor was before Congress doing a committee meeting as they were getting ready to push this to go in for the U.S. Congress to take this on across the country, as he talked about the impact of the economic productivity of $83.5 billion a year we're losing in our economy. $25 billion to healthcare. Y'all already know, here in the state of Tennessee, we chose not to get affordable care. So many people can't even get care for what they're dealing with. And they just got to deal with it. And guess what? It just pass it on and pass it on. And we wonder why we're not breaking the cycle of violence and breaking the cycle of poverty in our community, because we don't want to pay for it. If we don't pay for it now, we're going to pay for it later. This is where it's showing we're paying for it later. Special education, $4.6 billion. Those children don't need to be in special education. Those children need a hug, a love, and some support of their family in their community. And I guarantee you they lifetime. We see it every day. One of the things that kind of, and I ain't going to say what school I was in, but I was in a school last year, and they was walking me by a classroom that had a lot of kids that were having behavior issues. And over the door, it had 201. The people in Memphis know what that is. They said that's 201 Poplar. I said, hold up, man, don't say that. Because now they just saying these children here till they go to jail. 201 Poplar is our local jail. Child welfare, $4.4 billion. Criminal justice system, $3.9 billion a year. So here, as we brought the study to locally, and I know it's a lot of evidence and research that the University of Tennessee and other colleges and the great work that systems occur across Tennessee done with research and families, they begin to see that in the state of Tennessee, look at this, it marries what they seen back in 1996, 97. The only difference was we went from 22% of them back then that had 3 or more to 27% in the state of Tennessee. So 1 in every 4 of us have 3 or more aces up in this building. So don't trigger nobody on the way out the door. They might just go off. Wait till they get the full training, then say something to them. So we're going to hit on fostering resilience, what it takes to actually change our communities for the good to make an impact. If a child or if an individual is raised up in a negative and all they're hearing is negative and all they're getting is negative, guess where they're going to be? Their fulcrum is going to be moved towards the negative. They're going to be quick to act on what they know. Again, Dr. Stewart talked about the brain development of that young person. They only doing what they've been trained to do. If that's all somebody showed them, I say this often, and that's why when I went and sat down with the University of Tennessee and the doctors, I said, I need some of y'all doctors in the school with me. And I said this, then I went down and met with Director Rollins. I said, I need some of the police officers and the PSTs at the school. So he gave me 7 officers that meet here every other week with these children, learning how they can take the path from being in this community to being on the police department. See, if they don't see it, they can't be it. And this is why they got to see good role models, see positive outcomes. And I'm blessed to have one of our panelists, Travis McLaughlin, that's the principal of Georgia Hill Miller in our community. He said, Charlie, I need you at my school every Thursday to be a mentor and work with these kids. Bless me, not this Thursday, I didn't make it, but every Thursday with our kids. And them young men have really, you can see the change and shift in them, right? They just looking for role models. If you hear their story, it'll make you cry. Nobody home. Gang is life. Right. Drug dealing, that's life. They didn't choose that life. That's the life they in. And then they still have to come to school and still got to perform with that life. So I say it all the time, blood is thicker than water, because right now you're just talking about somebody that's going to run through me and run. I got to go back and sleep with this burr that's in my woods. So we got to look at how we foster over time, the cumulative impact of positive life experience and coping skills can shift the fulcrum position, making it easier to achieve positive outcomes. That's what you're going to hear in some of these evidence-based workshops that you go in, the things that are being done that shift that fulcrum. How can we do something? We can do something, Memphis. We can do something, Tennessee. And many of these organizations are doing it, and you're going to learn even greater how you can be a part of it. We are looking for the end result in all of this. How do we create safe, stable, and nurturing environment for our children? And again, we have to, again, not just when I begin the process and outside the door, if you live in this community, we are blessed with a model that many communities don't have. I think Binghamton is the only other community got where we have our district attorney, assistant district attorney working in the neighborhood with us. I go to lunch with the assistant district attorney, right? So we are talking about how we keep these children, how we look at other alternatives than just locking people up. The red tape that I've been able to do working with the district attorney at Old Island Station, she ain't downtown, she right here in the neighborhood, was I had a young man that called me and said, Charlie, he just broke into a church, but he didn't break, he broke in there to sleep because he didn't have nowhere to sleep. And so I brought him into the church, I started letting him stay at the church. So then I called and tried to get him in job court. Job court said, well, he on parole, we're not gonna be able to let him off because he on parole. So I called and said, what do we need to do? They said, well, he got to wait till next year that he can get off parole. I called the assistant district attorney. She took me down to the judge that day. I swear that I'm going to be with that person as they let him go. The judge signed the letter that day. The boy next week got to job court, now taking up a trade skill. That's how you work in your community. Improving air traffic control helps stress management across lifespan. Focus and attention, problem solving, planning ahead, behavior regulating, controlling impulses, adjusting to new circumstances. Again, executive functions and self-regulation skills can be built any point over a lifetime. It was Frederick Douglass that said it's easier to fix a child than to repair a broken man. So, and he said this years ago without some of the evidence, and we have the evidence and we still doing it backwards. So what are we doing backwards? Here goes where the money lies. The money tells the truth, right, director? The director, they can't get the state to fund nothing unless they have what the data say. The data say that you spend less money, went from 0 to 3 for these children. Watch this here. And they brain receiving more. But we spending less money when they 0 to 3. That's when we should be spending more money because they brain receiving more. We need to be teaching them IT. Something that this company is doing where they can actually, because these folks, they in other countries, they building houses in a day with some of the IT technology. Here we still doing it by Stone Age. Why? Because people benefiting off that. All they need is box packers in this community. They don't need nobody who gonna make $100 million because it'll put them out of business. Y'all better hear me. So then they say, oh, well, we'll spend more money when they're 18, 19 for job training programs, but look at this. The brain is not receiving it like it was back then. And you're wondering why they're in jail instead of building houses. I cried when I was invited to West Tennessee. I know you're not supposed to cry in a state penitentiary, but I cried. These men were singing a church song, and I got up to minister to them. That was my first time going to minister in the state penitentiary. I said, man, I'm crying because y'all guys are gifted. I said, man, y'all don't know the young men that out there that need this gift, and y'all up in here displaying it when you could have been doing it out there. But it's not what's wrong with them. It's what happened to them. So we talk about what happened. The biggest returns come from early investment. This is what happened is we're not spending the money where it counts. We wait until they get in there, and again, not rehabilitating the mind, not rehabilitating the soul, and putting them back out, letting them go right back through that same system. So what can be done as a community? Build executive function in childhood and adolescence, sports and activities, physical activity. I just seen our former Colonel Kirkwood just came through the door. He's going to be on our panel later. It was this man, I'm glad that he was a pastor, the Sister Turner, because if he wasn't a pastor, some of these colonels, they don't care. They job, again, that's their job as police to lock them up. They respond. But this colonel sat down. I came back from out the woods with Dr. Stewart, went in Colonel's office and said, Colonel, we're not locking these kids up no more. He said, what do you mean, Charlie? I said, it's not what's wrong with these kids. Look at the evidence. Look at the research. And Colonel said, what can we do? He began to call all the pastors in the community leaders. We started to work together, put the Fraser Athletic League, the Powell League, put these activities there. We've seen in this community under that colonel go from 72% decrease in the arrests in this community from 700 kids the first 5-6 years in the top 10 incidents going to jail, reduced down to 250 kids in this community actually going to jail. Give them a hand. And I thank Rotary Family Youth Initiative for their part in it, helping us provide staff that actually was to respond to those young people that helped those people that they were saying. Colonel said, Charlie, if I ain't locking them up, you need to tell me where we can send them to. We got to have somewhere to go. And that's what Merrill Lee Harris is saying, y'all. He said, I'm not building this jail. This jail they building now only going to have 40 beds. The one that's in now is bad, 100 and some beds, and it's a terrible place. And he said, so it's going to be less bad. That means the community needs to respond. This is why we're having this summit, to say we have to respond. Because if they're going to turn them back to us, we got to be ready for when they come. That's right. And these are some things you can do when they come. Many of you are already doing it. When we talk about what's being done at Shelby County Schools, and I'm excited as I have conversation here with Martin Luther King Prep, CEO Bobby White, that's over not only Fraser, well, it's still Fraser High School, but Martin Luther King High, Westside Miller, and Hearns Junior High School. It was talking about how do we include the trauma-informed model in his school, which is a charter school under the ASD. So again, other districts are looking at this as the governor signed legislation that every school got to have a plan in place. So that's one thing that's happening. Another thing is home visitation, visiting to pregnant women and families. I'm going to say this, our staff, not just the pregnant women, we visit the homes of anybody that's been impacted by trauma. I can tell you so many powerful transformation stories. I'm going to share this one from a home visitation. Child was acting out in school and getting in trouble. They was wondering why this child was so angry. Well, they fighting back and forth. We go sit down at the table with this family, and here we begin to talk with this mom and dad and this married couple, and here he was molested. And as a child, his auntie was selling him for crack at 8 years old. She was raped as a child. She didn't want to do it. He always wanted to do it. They fighting over it every night, and they wondered why, and never talked about what happened until that day. I said, this is what I need y'all to do from this day forward. You call him king and you call her queen, and then y'all gonna read about it in the Daily Memphis in a couple of weeks, because they said their household have been transformed. Their child is not acting out. They are speaking to each other. They said we lay in the bed, watch movies together. They weren't even touching each other until they dealt with the deep-rooted issue of what happened. So home visitation worked. Business and organization policies supporting working parents, and then parent support program for teens and teen pregnancy. One of the things that we were able to be, again, some of our health department friends that are here was able to be a champion over. When we started the baby store back in 2012, I see Pastor Ellis that's going to be on the panel too, that has a baby store still in our church, Impact Baptist Church, that we seen in Fraser now, higher than any third world country, 16.9 babies for every 100,000 babies, for every 1,000 babies were dying in this community. But under that work of working with those teen parents, working with the school system, we went down to under 10 per 1,000 babies dying in this community. We still got a long way to go, but we made progress going to those homes, having nurturing parenting classes, bringing help, fighting to get OBGYN clinics in this community. Of 50,000 residents, and we didn't even have an OBGYN clinic here. I'm getting ready to close here. And as we talk about some of the approach, I know Agape got some people that's here, but they couldn't do the workshop today, but doing a great work. This is one of the schools they're working in. They're working with, I see Apostle Ricky Floyd just walked in with the Pursuit of God. They have an office across the street in the Pursuit of God where they work with many families under this approach, the 2-generation, some 3-generation approach of early childhood intervention. Also promotes healthy parenting by those children as adults. Early child intervention needs to include focus on adult development as caregivers and those whose skills inherited to caring for others. Ensuring healthier, more mindful, social connecting caregivers positive impacts child health and also the next generation. Again, we want to break that cycle. So as we come to a close, many times before you all start doing the work that you're doing, and you're going to go out and get more people to do this work, it was immediately we turned to the professionals. And we got great professionals, like I said, Alliance Health in our community that provide that therapy and support. Glad to have their executive director and their staff here that's there for them. But the juvenile court say something wrong, send them to a therapist, right? The health care, something wrong. Human service, something wrong. Faith-based, even in the church, y'all. We didn't want to deal with it. So what we say, they need some counseling. Because many times we haven't dealt with our own stuff. I got many pastors in here, don't whoop me, pastors. But I say this, that when I do this work, I do it from a perspective of a story I read somewhere. That it talks about these 7 sons of Sheba. And they went out to try to cast these demons out of this particular young man. And the young man said, Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you? If you're going to do this work, you need to know who you are. Because if you go up in these children's face and anybody's face that something happened to them and you say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, look for the wrong thing. So it talks about how do we begin to change. Today is a change for the city of Memphis and the state of Tennessee as we brought down our community partners to say, hey, we don't want to just keep this in Nashville and rural. We want to bring this information, evidence-based approach to our communities. Because if we treat it from a philosophy in an approach that actually, again, knowledge is key, y'all. My people perish because of lack of knowledge. If we're not sharing this type of information, we keep getting the same results. I was excited when the mayor asked me to be on his transition team, Merle Lee Harris. Merle Lee Harris' mother was my 6th grade teacher. So if anything I said wrong today, count it to her. I said, Merle, that makes you have to invest more in education because if something wrong, she did. But she was a great teacher, great teacher. But I was excited to be on it because I had an impact to say to everybody in every meeting I kept going to, man, we need to make this a trauma-informed county. And to hear the mayor get up time and time again saying, we're going to make this a trauma-informed county, I'm telling you, all it takes is your voice to be influenced to make any change happen for somebody else. And that's how we get change. So as I bring it to a close, say this with me, it's not what's wrong, but it's what happened. Give yourself a hand.